A very good evening to one and all present here. Welcome to the Blackcoat presents the virtual conference on law, lockdown, and impact on real estate. I'm Devang Singh, partner of the Blackcoat, along with my co-partner Pushkal Garewal, and we are honored to host three eminent speakers with us: Mr. Arun Goel sir, Mr. Apurva Agarwal sir, and Mr. Satish Sonawale sir. Now, before I introduce everyone, I must introduce Arun Goel sir first. Now, Arun Goel sir is presently an independent director on the boards of SLMF Trustee Limited, Supervised Solution Private Limited, and Wordspaces Private Limited. Sir also has over 40 years of experience in real estate investment, funding, consulting, and financial services, of which over 15 years he has been CEO or MD in board level positions. He was formerly the CEO of LICHFL Asset Management Co., a private equity asset management business promoted by the LIC Group. Arun sir has also worked with DHFL Venture Capital Limited as CEO and Chairman of Investment Committee, Lloyd's Housing Finance Limited, and various other companies. If we are to introduce Arun sir, the whole day shall pass. So I must move on to Apurva sir. Apurva Agarwal sir, Managing Partner, Universal Legal, is an alumni of India's premier university, NLSIO Bangalore. Following which, he pursued his LLM in Corporate and Commercial Laws from Bond University, Australia, where he was featured in the Dean's List. Apurva sir has worked with several leading law firms in Mumbai, which includes the like of Luthra and Luthra law offices. Apurva sir routinely acts as the sole arbitrator for a number of commercial disputes and is presently an authority on real estate laws. Now, moving on to the next speaker of today, Mr. Satish sir. Mr. Satish Sonawale is the business head of Mumbai Nestaway. Satish sir, in his 9 years of experience, has worked in companies like Siemens, SAP, and RPG. Sectors he has worked in range from oil and gas, industrial automation, power, hospitality to the current one, real estate. Now, interestingly, he was also the part of growth story of Oyo Rooms, where he built the Mumbai Oyo team from scratch and managed the Mumbai city portfolio. He holds a PGP degree from IIM Ahmedabad. Now, after the introduction, I must cede the floor to our guest and eminent speakers. Over to you, Apurva sir.
Thank you for those kind words, and thank you for the lovely introduction to all of us. I'll just talk about the subject for a few minutes, and then each of the panels will speak for a few minutes, and we'll have a few question and answers before throwing the forum open to the public for question and answers. Now, over the last few weeks, 7 to 8 weeks, India has been faced with an unprecedented, extraordinary outbreak of COVID-19, necessitating social distancing and lockdown to prevent the transmission of the virus. This has stalled all businesses, barring essential services, presenting a unique challenge to the real estate sector and has brought construction activities ultimately to a halt, thus creating a force majeure event, and it is beyond the control of the parties or any other reasons which cannot be reasonably forecasted or provided against and which cannot be predicted. Construction activity is not an essential service, and hence no exemption has been provided for the same to go on during the lockdown period. We have to realize that this industry is one of the major employment providers to the unskilled and semi-skilled migrant workers who are stranded away from their native towns and villages during the times of lockdown. Whether these migrant workers will come back to the city to do the work is a debatable issue. However, to prevent the monetary issues with these workers, the Ministry of Home Affairs, by its order dated March 29, 2020, has cast the responsibility on the employers to ensure that these workers are paid wages during the period of lockdown as well. Also, what we've seen as a law firm that over the past few weeks, a lot of people are exiting the rental properties and or demanding reduction in the rentals which are payable to the landlords. The landlord vis-a-vis are demanding the full rent to be paid on the ground that the property is still being used and it's not in a physical damage, hence you still have to pay the rental. It's not a force majeure clause where the property is damaged in any manner whatsoever. So there's a bit of a debated issue on the interpretation of force majeure clause from both the perspective. Coming back to the lockdown, the construction in incomplete projects has also come to a complete standstill. The duration of these project delays will not just depend on lockdown, but it may time to resume construction on depending on when these migrant laborers come back in full swing, and a small component of since a large component of them have left for their hometowns. During these times of uncertainty, the big ticket purchases and the small ticket purchases have been deferred to a large extent. As a result, home sales and commercial property sales are bound to fall. Given the ongoing lockdown, most of the scheduled project launches during the festivals may have to defer this year, and there's also an anticipated increase in raw material costs, which developers may not be able to pass on to buyers in the current market situation. We really don't know how RERA and the RERA law and the authorities will play out given these circumstances, given the view of the conflictive interest of the developers and of the home buyers on the official buyers of the property commercial segment. These are the few introductory words from my perspective. Arun, do you have a few words to say before we go on?
Let me first thank Devang for his kind words during the introduction. Good evening to my fellow panelists and good evening to all the participants. The issue before us, which we are required to address, has got to do with the likelihood of the real estate sector in particular and the economy in general being affected by the coronavirus situation. In order to address this briefly, I would start by quickly running down some pointers on the state of the economy prior to lockdown, and then look at the impact of the lockdown on the real estate sector and the stakeholders there. So very quickly, when we look at the real estate sector in relationship to the GDP, we are looking at its contribution at about 6% to a 3 trillion size economy. Prior to the lockdown, by around 2019, we were already looking at a shortfall of urban housing at a little over 10 million units, which one presumes with the slowing down of the economy during 2019-20 would have further increased. The government projections for the growth of the GDP during the fiscal 2019-20 was estimated to be around 5%. Perhaps that was a charitable estimate. Some estimates suggested that just prior to the lockdown, the GDP had already slowed down to about 1.5%. These are obviously not, very positive indicators. Moving on, one of the biggest problems with the real estate sector had been facing was a huge pileup of unsold inventory. In the first half of 2019, the estimated unsold inventory was close to 5 lakh units, whereas the transactions were only about 1.25. So we are talking of about 25% transactions against unsold inventory of 5 lakhs in the first half of 2019. When we look at 2020, obviously, the situation is going to be different. People would have encountered the fact that the real estate market had already been softening and prices in most of the metros had started to fall. 5 to 10% reduction in prices was seen in many of the major metros already, and this we are talking of by last quarter 2019. The impact of the unsold economy translates into close to 13 lakh crores locked up in the business, which in turn had started to result in defaults with banks and non-repayment of loans, and the banks and the NBFCs seeing significant NPAs on their books. Again, we would presume that this is going to increase. The problem which the builders have been facing, and many people have suggested that the builders should be looking to reduce prices in order to sell off the piled up inventory, is the fact that those who have borrowed would find themselves hard-pressed to provide additional collateral, because any reduction in prices means that the value of the collateral would further reduce. So this is a bit of a catch-22 situation as far as the real estate developers are concerned. When we look at the other challenges coming out of the coronavirus situation, we are talking of the corporates already struggling prior to the lockdown and continuing to do so as they come out of the lockdown. Balance sheet sizes are going to shrink and there will be pressure on employee retention. As far as real estate is concerned, we expect that the sentiments would continue to be poor. Work from home is going to affect particularly commercial and take up of commercial and retail space, because if people are going to be forced to stay at home and not move out either to work or to shop, additional take up of space of this kind is not likely to happen in a hurry. And disinclination of people to travel around will obviously also impact tourism and the hospitality industry. And, this is a significant part of the economy which is also going to be affected. This part of the economy has an impact on real estate sector as well. Now, if we look at the players or the stakeholders of the real estate sector, obviously standing right up front is the developer. Already in stress in 2019-20 because of slowdown of the economy, will continue to be under stress 2020-21. And we'll have to see how the situation pans out moving forward. We have to take into account the fact that the start of the problems for the real estate sector actually commenced with demonetization. So there has been continuing stress post 2016-17 on this sector. And this is like a double whammy for the real estate sector. NBFC cash crunch has already resulted in further squeeze in liquidity. The NBFCs have been significant funders for this sector because they have the ability to address higher risk, and real estate sector generally is considered to be high risk as far as the banks are concerned. Construction, of course, has since stopped, actually the slowing down of the construction business, both infrastructure as well as real estate, started in Jan 2020, and post-lockdown has completely ground to a halt. This means that the construction industry, which is the second largest employer of migrant labor, has seen a move of the migrant labor back to their villages, and it's going to be time-consuming to get them back. Even if the sector opens up and goes 100% all guns blazing by, let's say, May. We go to the next stakeholders, which are the suppliers and the service providers. Factories and industries have closed down, so the availability of raw material it's going to take time for it to get back in the business. Many of the suppliers are actually in the small and medium industry, the SME group, and the SME group, by all accounts, has been the largest hit with the lockdown, the slowing down of the economy. And therefore, their ability to actually address the demands of the sector moving forward is going to be in question, coupled with the fact that the demand from the sector itself is going to be significantly reduced. We go to the customers. Primarily the middle class. One of the biggest concerns for the middle class moving forward is going to be job retention. There are concerns about how many people are going to end up losing jobs. While the government has been proactive in communicating to the industry at large and employers not to retrench and continue to pay salary, it's a question of ultimately whether the balance sheet will be able to afford it in the medium to long term. And therefore, I would expect that the economy will see significant increase in unemployment going forward. What will that entail for the real estate sector? For one, obviously lower sentiments and deferment of any intention to invest into any long-term asset. Two, possible defaults in housing loans from those who have borrowed and may end up losing jobs. And this will further impact the banking and NBFC industry, which is already stressed. So overall, obviously, not very good for sentiments. We come back to the PE investors. Now, this is a subsect of the banking and the NBFC sector, which typically fund this business. And the PE investors have been fairly aggressive in funding the real estate sector over the last decade or so. The positive outflow from the current situation probably for the PE sector would be good opportunities for them to get into the market. There'll be good pickings from distressed assets. There'll be projects from developers which they could be asked to fund if the banks and NBFCs are not aggressively back into the market. And I'm presuming that the PE sector would probably see good pickings. Obviously, they will not be able to fill in the gap from the banks and the NBFCs, but nevertheless, there's an opportunity there. Overall impact, I guess, as I've said, softening of prices, delays in completion of projects, inventory pile-up, low consumer sentiment. Again, an opportunity perhaps for those who are players in the real estate, investors in the real estate market, will be on the rental side. If the buyers defer decisions to buy real estate, given that there is a shortfall of housing units in excess of 10 million units, I'm expecting that the demand for rentals will move up. So this, I guess, is in brief my take on what the real estate sector is likely to see over the short to medium term. Thank you.
Thank you, Arun. Lovely to hear you and bring out some important issues. Let's pass on to Satish, who's from Nestaway, to see his perspective on co-working space and how he sees his company facing with this COVID-19 situation.
Yeah, sure.
Satish?
So I think, yeah, hi. So I think Arun has covered the economy and Apurva has tried to give an insight about the legal aspects of the lockdown. Okay, I would like to focus on the residential real estate sector of India. Okay, so the Indian residential sector has been grappling with subdued demand for the past few years. In an attempt to stay afloat amidst the changing dynamics, the developers have tried to pull the levers like, restricting supply, focusing on execution, reducing unit sizes, and developing affordable housing projects. However, the liquidity crisis, which was initiated by the IL&FS issue and the subsequent fallout of various financial institutions has further impacted the residential sector. Coming to COVID-19 situation, it has severely hit the residential real estate business, and the sector has come to a standstill. This is because there is a complete halt of site visits and discussions and documentations and closures, which are essential to close the deals. And the early indicators depict that we are likely to face a really tough time for the at least next 2 quarters, and the recovery has been pushed further away by at least a couple of years. The new launches that were supposed to happen in top 7 Indian cities, which were recovering gradually since 2017, like Arun had mentioned that post demonetization. So, but due to this liquidity crisis and the pace of new launch has really declined. Amidst the current COVID outbreak, we are likely to witness major disruptions due to construction delays and financial issues. Moreover, this time around, the festive season and the summer vacation period, which was the most opportune time for new launches, may be taking a beating. As is the third quarter of any calendar year is a slow for new launches due to the monsoon or the Shraddh period that is part of the Hindu calendar. In backdrop of all these, my view is that the new launches would see a decline of close to 25 to 30% in the current year. Moving on to sales of the inventory, again post 2017, after the demonetization and other structural reforms, considering the residential real estate sales are highly dependent on site visit interaction and discussions, like I mentioned earlier. The sales in 2020 again might be significantly hit due to COVID-19 outbreak. Many home buyers will either consider postponing their decisions either to stay away from visiting the site, or just for the fact that they might expect a price correction. At the same time, new launches coming to a halt for the next few months because of containment in the country. I think home buyers may come into action post 2 quarters, and maybe and even when they come into action, they would focus on the existing unsold inventory, which are still stuck at various stages of construction. So that is what I had to say about the Indian real estate residential sector.
Thank you, Satish. Lovely hearing two different perspectives on the real estate sector and how COVID-19 has impacted us. Just a few questions we have. I thought I'll open it up to Arun or you to answer them and then see how it progresses. Now, given the background of the economic downturn over the last few years and the COVID-19, which has hit us right from the last couple of weeks, couple of months, resulting in the lockdown, and people now working from home, will this accelerate change in the way people live and work and use real estate? Are we moving towards a new normal routine of living and working at home and usage of real estate changing and the dynamics changing in totality? Arun, any comments?
Well, it's difficult to see any significant change in the immediate future, and long-term impact of the coronavirus on the industry and the way people are likely to behave in terms of the way they live and work is a little difficult to predict, for the simple reason that the medium to longer term impact of COVID-19 is going to be a function of the fact that how soon is the remedy for this virus in terms of medication, in terms of vaccination, going to be available. If it is available soon enough and people are able to get back to their normal lives in the way they did earlier, I guess the changes are not likely to happen. But if it drags on for a year or more, then it's obviously going to be a situation we'll need to revisit. So from my point of view, it's a tricky thing to try and predict right now.
Satish, have any comments or shall I move on?
Yeah, so what I would like to add over here is the current behavior pattern that we are seeing. It is a forced behavior pattern, right? It is because of the government restrictions, that, most of the companies have chosen. And even we should remember, when this lockdown had started, a lot of companies did resist. Okay, they were still trying to operate despite government orders. So this is one we should remember, that this is a first step. Second, how things will pan out once the lockdown is lifted. I think currently the only place to look at is China, where it has been more than 4 months. And if you believe the reports, which generally people don't do, the Chinese reports, the data that is coming out of there is that close to 55 to 60% of people are returning to their workforces, but in stages. Okay. So it will take some time to build confidence. Okay. So at least in the 6 to 8 month period, I would say that, the work from home option would be used quite frequently. But going forward, again, like Arun sir said, I mean, it all depends on when we find the cure and how things pan out. But then maybe even if we consider a horizon of 18 months, things might go back to how it was with a few changes. That is what I think.
Okay, given the scenario and background, the two interrelated questions. One, how are we going to value what is the impact on the valuation of the real estate which we own? And secondly, connected to that would be, we all, all of us are anticipating a fall in the real estate prices, right? And people have already made some down payments, signed agreements under RERA with the builders to purchase certain price at a certain rate. Would this include, then can somebody renegotiate that agreement and bring down the price lower, and therefore the valuation of asset will decrease or increase accordingly? Will it affect the home loan, not affect the home loan, all the commercial loans against that asset, the collateral valuation? There are multiple questions on this valuation assets and price difference. How would how would you react to that, Arun?
Yeah, it's a very interesting and important question. Obviously, the expectation is that asset values are going to be negatively impacted. Real estate values had been under stress for well over a year now, and it is expected that post lifting of the lockdown, when transactions start happening again, the valuations would be down. In terms of its impact on the sector, there are two components to it. One is fresh inventory coming into the market from the developer and the prices thereof, and the second is the secondary market. The secondary market is going to be impacted, much faster than the inventory coming in from the builder, because the builder, as I already mentioned, is going to be hard pressed to bring down prices in a project which is under development and where sales have already happened, because that's going to bring back a huge amount of negative sentiments from the people who have already bought in. Apart from the fact that funding into this into the project would get impacted, because if you bring down prices and the collateral values are down, then you get exposed to banks and financial institutions who will need additional collateral. So it's a bit of it's a very difficult situation for the developer. And it's going to be even more difficult for, let's say, real estate valuers. Typically, real estate valuers look at the transaction metrics, over a period of time. And here's a scenario wherein transaction values pre-lockdown are no longer going to be an indicator for valuations moving forward. And until transactions continue to start happening, real estate valuers will find it very difficult to actually go about doing their business. So I guess, new benchmarks will be required to be set, and it'll take time for transactions to commence. Thank you, Apurva.
Thanks, Arun. Satish, pointed question for you. Since you are in the business acquiring residential properties on rent and then passing it off to subtenants or sub-licensing it out, if the valuation of the asset gets affected downwards, or if the valuation prices are renegotiated downwards at the purchase price, how does it impact you in your business?
So, of course, even the rental market will not be untouched by the current situation, because it is going to hit both the sides, the demand side and the supply side as well. Supply side, I've tried to cover in my introduction speech what happens in the real estate segment. The demand side, since quite a few of the people who have gone back to their hometowns, so we don't see them coming back in the near future, and the demand is slated to fall. So once the demand falls, there would be huge pressure on the owners of these properties to, renegotiate the deals, and because the existing tenants will, of course, take this opportunity to renegotiate and get a better deal out of it. So I see a lot of such renegotiations to happen in the coming days because of the uncertainty. However, how this pans out, or how this will, what course this will take, only time will tell.
Are you renegotiating any of your contracts right now?
Okay. Yeah, of course. I mean, if you look at the industry as a whole, I mean, there was a news item saying that all the big retail outlets have been renegotiating their deals with all the landlords. So it is happening. Everyone is trying to save as much as they can because of the uncertainty, and because business is actually not happening. Okay, so in light of that, a lot of owners are also coming to the table and discussing about these things.
Okay, now just another question. Let's see who probably can take it forward. Given this economic and the COVID-19 impact on the real estate sector and the liquidity crisis, how is it actually going to impact the liquidity and debt convenience for owners and the occupiers? Arun, any say on that? Or you see no impact
Yeah,
at all?
yeah. You're talking about liquidity and debt as far as
Convenience, yeah.
yeah.
Against the,
Obviously, it's going to be a matter of concern for those investors who have huge exposure to real estate on their books, because they will, face the liquidity crunch. Having said that, income yielding assets, particularly commercial, quality commercial real estate, may continue to find, funding, but probably the lenders will want to look at the lock-in covenants a little more closely, unlike before. And I would expect that projects which have on date lock-in covenants of 3 years or more are more likely to find easy funding than those where the lease is likely to be running out, though it may be renewable on the part of the lessee. So this is insofar as the liquidity issue is concerned. Self-occupied assets will find it difficult to borrow against existing assets for the simple reason that valuations are going to be in dispute, and therefore again, there's going to be a significant liquidity issue going there. Thank you.
you made an interesting point about lockdown, the locking period of 3 years and more, and people not being able to exit, and therefore those will be easy to get loan against. But what we are seeing the last few weeks, last 2 to 3 weeks, lot of agreements, rental agreements are coming to a test even from category A kind of people who are the tenants, who are not looking at the COVID-19 as an excuse and a force majeure excuse to exit these agreements, either generally or for whatever reason. So in light of your comment, how would you react to this kind of situation?
Yeah, that's a very fair point. And, as somebody who is in the legal field, you will see much more of this going forward.
Right.
It is good for you. We have to actually see. I mean, I frankly am not the expert here insofar as the legal issue is concerned. And we have to wait and see how the courts will determine the issue moving forward. But, responding to your point, it would actually be for the lender to get fresh commitment back from the occupiers. So they're not going to be looking at the lease agreement, by itself. They will want, commitments from the occupiers that they will be, honoring these lease agreements and the lock-in periods, before the lender takes any risk of exposure.
Okay. Satish, something for you. With how will they be down in light of COVID-19? We're seeing a lot of space optimization for cost rationalization and social distancing. How do you see that perception? Is it true, not true, or people are going to keep going ahead with the real estate in large quantities as we see right now?
See, when it comes to renting out, what happens is there are two aspects. One is regarding the office spaces, and second one is residential. Office spaces over the years have been getting cramped, as in over the years people are trying to push in more and more number of people in the same space available. So once this lockdown is lifted, that will have to completely change. This densification that had happened, it will have to get reversed, and there will have to be lesser people that will have to be accommodated. So that is one thing when talking about the office spaces. Regarding the residential apartment, so residential renting, again, there are multiple types that generally market operates in. One is the full houses or family houses. The second is a shared inventory, but then the rooms are sold on, the inventory is sold on room basis. And the third is the inventory is sold on shared bed basis. Okay, suppose a bedroom, there's a 2 BHK and there are 2 beds in a single bedroom, then 4 beds are independently shared. So those kind of inventory is going to get hit wherever there was shared inventory. The inventory which people are already preferring, and we've been getting a lot of inquiries also for the same, is for independent rooms and independent full houses. Okay. So gradually there will be a shift towards independent rooms. However, there are a lot of budget restrictions as well for people. There's a large segment of people, young people, who stay in the PGs. So in cities like Bangalore or Pune or Hyderabad or even in Mumbai. So there the cost of shifting to a room would be drastically higher. So what trend we are seeing over there is, rather than PGs, they are trying to find independent 2 or 3 BHK by getting together 2 or 3 of their friends, and then they would be renting out. So there is a considerable shift in the buying pattern, at least in the rental segment, that we are observing over here.
Okay, couple of questions. How will the rental contracts end during, ending during lockdown be affected? I mean, today we have the standard clauses of, the boilerplates, what we say, Arun and Satish, that, if the agreement is ending on, let's say, 31st of March 2020, and we have a lockdown state right now, how are we going to hand back the keys and get repossession? I mean, legally you have to, but physically and practically it's thing. So, I mean, if I'm forced to continue a rental space, even though I want to surrender it, legally speaking, what is my position? I mean, as a lawyer, I'm in a quandary as to how do I tackle a situation like that.
So see, if I can start here, we are encountering such situations at Nestaway, where a lot of tenants have already scheduled their move-outs, a lot of houses with a lot of owners who already have opted out of Nestaway. Okay, so there we are forced not to take any action till the lockdown is lifted, because there is nothing that we are able to do. The restriction in rental space is because a lot of societies have restricted entry of new people and into the societies. So any new entry or exit is not being allowed by the society. So it is currently frozen. Okay. And we have discussed the situation with both the parties, the owners and the tenants as well. And then the current understanding is that we hold positions till the time there is clarity, because there is also a health angle and the safety angle involved for the tenants concerned over here. So there is an understanding. This point, there is not much disagreement which is happening on ground.
Something for you with the focus
Apurva,
on.
I'd just like to add add a point from my own experience. In fact, just prior to the lockdown, I was advising a couple of people, clients on transactions, both on the rental side as well as on disposal. And as is the case with the transactions, typically they identify a timeline for completion. And it was my advice to them actually to defer both these transactions, because it was anybody's guess as to what kind of timeline one would be looking for. And in the event a timeline could not be met, because of unforeseen circumstances or even foreseen circumstances, let's say the sub-registrar's office not opening up for the transaction to happen, or unable to travel because of flights and so on and so forth, there'll be unnecessary dispute. So the clients, of course, accepted the suggestion that it would be better to defer the transaction rather than get into something which they had no control over.
I agree. I think deferment is the only solution right now, because even as a law firm, there are quite a few of our real estate transactions stuck up because we are for the inability to register the transaction and not for any other issue. So I think that's the new normal right now. Things don't open up. But coming to the new normal, let's now focus on the liquidity issue and the cash management for all the corporates who are the taking properties on leasing. Now the new with focus liquidity and cash management, the concept now which is fast getting growth because of COVID-19 work from home. How is it going to really affect the real estate acquisition in terms of purchase and in terms of renting out? In both the situations, how is it really going to affect? Are we going to see for every 100 seats you need, take only 70 to 80 seats or lower because obviously, not 100 seats are occupied at a given point of time, or what is it? I mean, I'm not too sure, but how do you see cash liquidity management versus work from home versus liquidity? How are we going to marry all three together?
Well, it's a very difficult situation. If we look at on the commercial side, the office space and so on and so forth, I don't see actually any new transactions, for acquisition of new office space happening in the short to medium term, given that we are first talking of social distancing. Therefore, the density of office space is actually, occupancy is going to reduce. And therefore, there's little scope for, people taking on new space. Unless, of course, the leases have expired and they're looking to go down to, smaller spaces. On the residentials, and again, the issue is going to be that people need to have a physical look at the space. They need to send in their architects, they need to send in space planners who need to actually visit the space and see what they can do. And without that, if even partial lockdown continues, the inability to travel, etc., is going to make a huge impact to decision making. And the same thing holds true for residential as well. An individual who's looking to buy a house, invariably, once in a lifetime kind of a decision, wants to actually touch and feel and have a look. They want to see the location and they want to see the project. They want to see, let's say, mock flats which have been put out by the developer. And therefore, I'm expecting that all these decisions are going to be deferred for quite some time. Obviously, this is going to have an impact on liquidity all around. Apurva.
Okay. Now, given the scenario right now where the market prices are expected to go downturn and everything else, and what's been happening in the real estate industry for the last few years, including Demon, RERA coming to being, whether rightly or wrongly, GST implications and all other host of issues affecting real estate directly or indirectly. And even under RERA, we have that 70-30 ratio of 70% to be used for project and 30 for the admin users. And the downward trend is, would it be a smart decision in the short term? A short term for me means less than a year, to reassess your properties and sell off your immovable assets if you have any, or hold on? What's your gut feeling?
Well, see, typically in a scenario where the economy is under stress, real estate acquisitions are put on hold. So that's a given. Now you're talking of actually disposal, and disposal suggests that somebody has to be seriously stressed to be looking to get out of their exposure to real estate portfolio. The challenge is going to be answering the question how stressed, because any disposal moving forward over the next 12 months or 18 months is going to involve a significant amount of a haircut for the investor. And are they mentally prepared to take that haircut is a question. So I guess the answer really has to be to do with the, how stressed are they going to be financially for them to get out any which way.
Satish, any comments before I move on?
No, I think sir is covered.
Okay. Now, one question which is coming. What was the existing NPS prior to COVID-19 before the lockdown? The government has obviously not been trying to address these substandard assets at all and step into NPA. The Swami Fund, which comes to rescue existing NPS, but already existing secular lenders are fulfilling part of the first charge under this fund. So, what are going to happen to these kind of issues, substandard NPAs were already existing, and came the fact that the moratorium has been down for 3 months and stuff like that. So will it apply to things that are already in bad or even only to post COVID-19?
Apurva, I couldn't actually hear the question in totality, but from what I could gather, you are talking about how the question relates to how performance of assets on the books of banks and BFCs is going to be addressed. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Well, as you have already pointed out, the government, the Reserve Bank of India is suggesting guidelines for looking at stressed assets in a new fashion for a short term, which is really got to do with allowing the banks and the non-banking finance companies to better manage their balance sheets and not put them in greater stress than they already are, because otherwise they will need fresh capitalization, which in this market is not going to happen easily. But the larger issue is that if the assets are not performing, then at some point of time, the lender has got to bite the bullet. And what do they do? Now, this will require a considerable amount of rethink on the back of, on the side of the government and the regulators, because it is not going to be the case that every asset which is not performing cannot be turned around. It may require a fresh look. It may require, some additional funding, and the whole approach to this sector will need to be looked at afresh to be able to sift assets which are actually good or okay and which can be turned around as distinct from those which are going to be in really bad shape and where the banks will require to actually classify them as NPAs. Apurva.
Okay, just a final question before we open the session to the audience at large. Now, I mean, we talked about optimization of real estate, we talked about liquidity and cash management. There's one, I mean, we know how the hospitality industry is being affected because of the lack of movement and people are now using Zoom like we are today, all the business meetings rather than to travel across. So, are we going to see acquisition, I mean, people moving to co-working space or co-living space on a larger scale, or that's also kind of standpoint or standstill, considering, the various issues, including social distancing, which are new normal now, playing into effect on everybody's heart. Satish, since you are in the co-living space, I think you take the first call.
Yeah, so with respect to co-living, I think this concept is new to the market as a whole. 2 years back, nobody had heard about it. Okay, and we at Nestaway realized the need for such a thing in the market, and we launched our version, which is called Hello World. Hello World is an independent subsidiary of Nestaway, which is focusing on co-living and student housing. So how this would affect, it would affect in 2 ways. One is the revenue streams, and second is the what modifications would you make to the facilities. For revenue streams point of view, a lot of these co-living facilities also depend on short-term stays, which could be considered kind of a Airbnb or a hotel kind of a concept where people come and stay for 10 days or 15 days. Okay, so that revenue stream will be hit very hard. And secondly, changes with respect to the facility, as you rightly highlighted. Considering the social distancing, there has to be some rearranging that you have to do regarding the area and encourage social distancing. Then a lot more focus has to be on the cleanliness and sanitization of the facilities from time to time. So I think whoever is into this will have to adopt to this as soon as possible in order to, save their back.
So, I mean, this extra cost, taking off from you mentioned sanitizing and other additional costs which has to be borne, keeping in mind social distancing and the after effects of COVID-19. I mean, how are we going to pass that cost on to the end user customer, or are you going to absorb it on your own? I mean, because the cost is going to be a tremendous outflow for you
The
also.
cost is going to be tremendous, and see how it is. As it is, the co-living segment works on very thin margin. I think again the deals with the property owners will have to be renegotiated to come to reality with the current reality that we are in. And definitely the customer, the end user is not going to pay for it in the current scenario. In fact, the sales are still dipping. So we don't expect that the customer will be able to bear the burden. But then some kind of arrangement will have to be figured out with the property owners.
Arun, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have actually a slight, I want to bring in something different on this issue. You see, we probably now need to relook, and not just we, I'm talking of the government in particular, at the way we expect this whole issue of occupancy of real estate, more particularly in the housing sector, how it requires to be addressed. For long, ever since I have been in the real estate sector, the whole approach of the government has been to actually enable the occupier to own the asset. And to that an extent, we have always been talking about the shortfalls and how they can be met, and how additional housing loan companies, etc., can be brought into play so that more funding and financing can be provided, and so on and so forth. But over the last couple of decades, all that we have seen is that the housing shortage continues to remain virtually at the same level. And one of the big reasons, obviously, is growth in population. I think this huge calamity which has come upon us perhaps requires us to have a fresh look at the rental aspect of occupancy. And one of the reasons why rentals are not very, the rental market is not very active is primarily because of the owners on the housing side being afraid of losing their property. One issue which the government needs to look at is bringing into play large managers of rental properties. People who can take over huge inventories, bring them into the market, manage them, maintain them. And this indirectly addresses your question, wherein scale perhaps could assist in handling costs much more effectively. And the government and people in the legal fraternity need to kind of get the government to have a relook at the at the way the agreements are today put together. We have leave-in license arrangements of 11 months and so on and so forth. I don't see any reason why you cannot have a 10-year lease agreement or a rental agreement if the legal framework can ensure that at the end of the 10th year, the owner can get back the property. This will perhaps ensure that a huge amount of unsold inventory can, even by developers, can be brought into the rental market. The developer can perhaps securitize the cash flows and bring in some liquidity. And perhaps banks and NBFCs can find a new avenue for providing funding. Apurva.
Agreed, Arun. I mean, that's a valid point you made. Just to take off on what you said on rental of properties for 5 years plus or 10 years. I mean, one of the issues which you mentioned, whether people return the property back to the owners. The other issues why we as a law firm, or most law firms don't advise renting out for more than 5 years is because the cost factor, because standard implications on a transaction, at least in Maharashtra, for 5 years is more cost efficient than even doing for 5 years one day. So cost is another implication which people have to look into factor before they take property on leases or leave-in license. Given that thing, one question has come up from the audience, which I think Arun would be better positioned to ask. What would be the position of an AI or a venture VC fund, private equity fund, in terms of real estate sector to fund real estate projects given the scenario we are in today?
Sorry, could you repeat that, please? The last bit.
Given the scenario we are in today, the impact of COVID-19 and the various situations which has happened to us, what would be the position of AIF funds or a VC fund in real estate sector to fund the corporates or builders in terms of equity participation?
Okay.
I mean, given the fact that, would you be interested in funding them?
Yeah, I think I mentioned on in my opening remarks that there is probably an opportunity for PE players to fund projects or to acquire distressed assets because the valuations are going to be stressed. And I mentioned again that not every project is going to be something which will go down the tube. There are a lot of builders out there who probably with some funding can turn around the project. So I believe that this is actually the market for those people who know and understand this business to look around for opportunities and make some money. Frankly, there's a good time. Having said that, I personally would prefer to look at the investment side on a project to project basis rather than on the balance sheet basis. So I would prefer to go into a developer and identify specific projects which I would like to fund rather than give a blanket carte blanche amount of money to fund the balance sheet.
Okay, great. I mean, one question which has again come up, either you or Satish, whoever would think. Do you think the NBFCs will start funding the commercial real estate sector, or NBFCs are also going to take a backseat right now? Satish, you want to take off?
I think Arun sir is in a better position to answer this.
Okay, Arun.
Well, thank you. I think the NBFCs are really another sector which is extremely stressed. There's huge liquidity problem there, and the banks are also not providing monies to the NBFCs. And the NBFC's risk appetite was much more than the banks, so therefore their exposure to projects which are going to be in more serious trouble is that much more. And therefore, I expect that the NBFCs are going to be taking a back seat for some time for taking fresh exposure to this sector.
Okay. Thanks. Satish, a question for you. And from one of the audience that's come up, will the hostel kind co-sharing model work at this stage for college students as part of the real estate projects? For the simple reason now, since that people are going online in the education sector, especially, let's take, for example, preparation for CAT and various competitive exams are going online rather than physical mode, given the COVID-19 situation. So it's going to have an impact on the real estate sector also, because these training centers also require real estate, which probably they're not going to take as much real estate and move on to online. So from that perspective, do you see in your model something like a hostel kind of co-sharing space for students in various towns or cities? Because now we don't need to configure, let's say in Kota, where you have the IT and the medical, but it can be pan-India now. Your view?
Yeah, so this will definitely have a hit on the student migrant population, and this we have observed in both Kota and Pune, Bangalore as well. A lot of students from nearby towns and cities, at least for Pune and Bangalore, they migrate to these cities for studying. And Kota, though, as such, the entire country, people from entire country come there. And with this development, the risk associated with staying at a distant place. I'm not sure how the parents. I'm not sure if the parents are willing to take that risk to send their kids or to a faraway place. So this will have an effect on the PG market that is working there. And but definitely, if you offer better facilities, better cleanliness and sanitization facilities, like I mentioned, plus with private rooms, okay, this is again a good segment where people are again ready to spend a lot as well. The ticket size also, even in a city like Pune, goes up to 40,000 a month for a student, which a parent is ready to pay. And there is that market as well, and that market I think will be able to pay much higher amounts also, given the facilities are better. So Again, it depends. I would say overall there would the business would shrink, but then there is money to be made. Okay, there is business that is there that can be done if you do the right modifications and if you are able to price it at a correct rate.
Okay, I think we'll just take the one last question. We've already run over time, and before that, we'll just have some closing remarks from both Arun and you. Okay, I mean, Mo's question pertaining to Nestaway work. I mean, on a business model, which has been come from one of the audience guys here. Does Nestaway work on fixed rent or revenue share? What is more sustainable given the light of COVID-19, and how do we take it forward?
So the answer is quite obvious. I mean, everything on revenue share is always profitable, and Nestaway also has been, working on this revenue share model. We did have some fixed portfolio in the initial days, but as we matured as a company over the past 5 years, we have realized that a revenue share model is the way forward for any organization, and we have learned it well in the initial days and took corrective actions. So revenue share model is the way for the future.
Okay, Arun, some closing remarks from you before you wind down.
Well, I think, I have to say only two things. One, that the overall sentiment of this session may have been a little pessimistic given the impact of Corona on the economy or likely impact and on the real estate sector as well. But I would just say that, we all need to stay positive and hopefully this too will pass, and we should be looking to getting back in business probably in the not too distant future. Thank you.
Satish, some closing remarks from you.
I think I completely agree with Arun sir that we have to be positive. This is a challenging time for everybody around us, and only a positive approach will help us to sail through it. Requesting everyone to stay indoors and stay safe. Take care of yourself and your families. Thank you.
Okay, since a few things, thank you all for participating, and it's been a pleasure interacting with you. There'll be a lot of takers from this. Obviously, the market is depressed. Everybody understands that, but let's not get panic and get into sell mode. Things will improve. It can't get worse from here. So let's stay positive. Let's stay safe. Over to you, Devang and Pushkal, for closing it out. Devang?
Sir, I would like to give special thanks to Apurva sir. And sir, before I end this meeting, the Blackcoat would like to thank all the participants who become the part of this exhilarating webinar. And all of us are lucky to enough to listen these respected tycoons in the real estate. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks
very much.
Bye.
Thank you guys for organizing. Thank you.
Satish,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
It was wonderful.
Everyone.